to the Irresistible Marketing Pod, the podcast that wants to empower women, queer, and BIPOC entrepreneurs to get rich AF. Speaking of, my guest today likes to say, if you want to light all your money shit on fire, start a business. Truer words, right? It turns out there is often a lot of grief involved in getting your nervous system ready to welcome in a ton of money from your work, especially if you inhabit an identity that has typically been paid a lot less than your white male colleagues for the same work. And there's nothing like opening a business and having to literally name your price to bring the money wounds you didn't even know you had to light. Money coach Selomé Samuel and I get into the crying on the floor moments that are an often necessary part of the healing process in our relationships with money. If you struggle with pricing, saying no to pro bono work, or live in fear of being referred to as expensive, you do not want to miss this episode. Enjoy. Well, hello, Selomé. Welcome to the Irresistible Marketing Pod. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Let me give you a chance to introduce yourself and your awesome work to the good people.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Selomé. I am a money coach, and I come to that with a trauma-informed lens, mostly informed by my own disastrous history with money. But I help lots of people, particularly people who haven't really been well served by the financial services industry, which tends to be women, people of color, queer folks, just heal their relationship with money so that they can live the abundant life that they've always wanted and, do work that is fulfilling to them.
That is so awesome. And I'm really excited to talk with you in March 2024 because in my group coaching program, the squad, our theme this month is pricing. And everyone's finding out it's bringing up a lot of emotional stuff when you're asked to do something like put a dollar value on your work. Very triggering.
Hmm.
More about that later. I wanted to start out with you recently sent out a newsletter that was awesome, where you mentioned that we are accidentally hypnotizing ourselves all of the time with our thoughts about money. And so I was hoping, A, could you explain that concept for the listeners who may not have read that yet?
Yeah, well, first of all, get on my email list. You're missing out. Um, but yeah, it's because I've recently become kind of obsessed with hypnosis after doing a little bit of a training. And I think I, like so many people, had this misconception that like hypnosis was like the magic trick that you see on stage where like people are controlling your body and like making you do all sorts of things that you don't want to do. When really it's just utilizing the power of suggestion to work with your subconscious mind. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. I think the thing that most commonly comes to mind is like putting people into a trance, which is great. But things that teachers have told me is that like actually we are just hypnotizing ourselves all the time, even if it's like you're reading a book, like you're getting yourself like mentally suggested that like these characters exist and all of this stuff is happening and it's significant to like watching a movie, etc. Like you can sort of understand how broad this gets to be. And so I think the thing that we don't realize is that we are suggesting things to ourselves all the time in our mind about our relationship with money. And as I wrote in my newsletter, like I was convincing myself that like I was bad with money, that I was irresponsible, that like all of that, like I could never be good at money because I just like I didn't grow up with it, or I wasn't raised learning about it, or they didn't teach me in school, or whatever, it could go on infinitely. So I think that this is really at the crux of like the work that I do with clients is also to help them realize that until you examine these things, there's so many subconscious patterns or beliefs or thoughts or societal conditioning that's essentially making all of your financial decisions for you. And you get to reclaim that and sort of like write the new narrative, make a new suggestion, but that it's happening sort of whether you want it to or not, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, like it is still happening.
That is so fascinating. So, like, in essence, any thought we repeat to ourselves a lot is we're like bringing ourselves into a suggestible state. Like, that's true through the repetition.
Hmm.
It's so interesting. Okay. So, I know a lot of us probably don't even take note of our passing thoughts about money. But like I mentioned with the squad, when we're talking about pricing, like, what is the dollar amount I'm saying is the value for my work? Um, what in your experience do you see as unconscious thoughts that might be throwing monkey wrenches in that process or triggering us when we're trying to do businessy things.
The businessy things in particular. Okay, because I was like, in general, it's infinite. Um, but I mean, I think the thing is that the thoughts that you have in relationship to your business are also the thoughts that you are having in relationship to your life. I think that business can just force you to bring up things that you wouldn't otherwise have to face if someone is just like giving you money to do a job, etc. So I think that, like you spoke to, it can bring up a lot of thoughts of like unworthiness, like, who am I to be charging this? Like, I would be doing this for free. Like, I don't want to be sleazy. Um, I think there's also a lot of fear around like, if someone pays me this amount, like, can I actually show up? Can I deliver the result? I'm going to be responsible for this person. I think there's a lot of codependency, frankly, that can come up in business. Um, and then there's so many other things about like beyond just pricing around like what does it mean to be seen? Like what does it mean to take up space? What does it mean to like call yourself an expert or put out controversial views? Like there's so much about being a business owner, especially like a solopreneur, which I think, I am, you are, most probably of your clients are at this stage, that like your identity and like your business are so closely tied together that it can just, like, the weight of everything can feel so much heavier, and the responsibility of that in turn can feel heavy, and then you tie like your very money and survival needs to it, and it's just kind of like putting gasoline on like a fire of like fear and anxiety and uncertainty. I really sound like I'm selling business, but like it also in the reverse can be like so healing and so transformational, because I think that so many of us don't get the opportunity to really question um question these kinds of responses, and to really think about like, what does it feel to sort of like boldly stand for yourself and consider yourself an expert and ask for money, and maybe do something that's really different from your family, and maybe do something that like someone who holds your identity might not have done before. So like there's a lot of gifts for sure, but there's a lot of challenges.
I'm so glad you spoke to that because, yeah, like we're really selling business here. Like, it's so triggering. You're gonna freak out. You're gonna have all these money wounds you didn't know you had. But it's also like a gift. It's like in a weird way. It's like, how else would you be aware of this stuff that's impacting your life so deeply? Like, I'm grateful that my business surfaced all these wounds I don't think I would have been aware of otherwise. But we're also like you said, impacting other areas of my life, like there's no money thing that just impacts business and like doesn't play a role elsewhere in my life. Like we were recently unpacking in the squad, like a few of us, myself included, like get pretty triggered when someone says, "Oh, you're expensive," or "That's expensive." And since I have an also trauma-informed money coach on the call, I'm curious what your thoughts about that are. Like, have you had to unpack like that for
Yeah.
yourself or for clients? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I also have some like examples of that in my personal life, but like I don't know that I've had a client directly say that to me, but I know that that's been one of my biggest fears that I had to work through around my own pricing, that it was like, how can I like charge people to help them figure out their money? Like they need help, they need money. So like it was like this weird like mental trap that made me feel like I was somehow like taking advantage of people, and like I should be doing this at like a discounted rate and it should be free. But then, you know, I think it's taken a long time for it to feel embodied, because of course there was like the logical part of my brain that's like, but wait, like how much money have I spent on my own training, let alone time, let alone like all of this stuff? And like I actually only feel like I recently got to a new level of relationship with that recently, when somebody, like a friend, was saying to me, I can't remember exactly the context of the conversation, but like she was actually reframing like my prices as like cheap. Like she was like, well, if you think about like the value that they're getting from this and like the benefits that your clients experience, like you're changing their entire life. So like what is a few $1,000s to like change your entire life, right? And when I think about myself, I'm like, yeah, I've spent more than I charge on other coaches, and like I didn't think that that was like outrageous or unreasonable or super expensive or meant anything terrible about them. Not to mention like however much I've spent on like things that are also important to me, but it's like how much have I spent on therapy and like how much have I spent on like food or clothing, you know? I think that when we can tune into like value and really own like our worthiness in our work and understand that like our needs are also important, I think that it starts to shift. But I think that that's like such a common trap for service providers in particular, and I think particularly like gender and racial minorities. It can feel so wild to be like, how can I ask for like this amount of money at once? It feels unreasonable, but it's like not really.
I totally agree. Like for me, like some of the money wounds that have been surfacing is like this thought of like, what am I allowed to do as like a queer Latina? Because in like a corporate setting, there's stuff you can't do without like losing your job, including like asking to be paid the same as colleagues in different identities. And so, like, when you're suddenly you've had to follow these unfair, arbitrary rules your whole professional life, and then you open your business, it can feel really disorienting to be like, wait, I am allowed to do, I am allowed to just say what I want. Like, have I'm imagining this is something you have to unpack with clients a lot.
Yes, and I mean, primarily with myself, you know, like I was my first best client and like I've been I've been in so many work situations where I found out that like my dude colleagues were getting paid more than me for like literally the exact same job. Like nothing different, like the exact same job. And it just like made me infuriated. And also like there are so many times in work environments where I was like penalized essentially for like speaking out about like sexism or even just like poor management or disorganization. Like I've been fired like several times. It's like not a thing that like I'm proud of, but I think there can be so much wounding there, right? Around like what does it mean when I actually speak up and I actually represent my beliefs? And then I think we can get into like political beliefs and just like all of the fucking chaos that's going on in the world at all times. Like it can feel really scary to feel like, oh no, like I have to be this like very like clean, like PC polite version of myself in order to like do business. I'm doing air quotes. But like in reality, right? Like the reasons that people would want to hire us are because we are different from those people. And in fact, those things that have felt like liabilities in the past are actually strengths, right? So it's like such a mind fuck. I feel like starting a business is like you get this opportunity to heal and like unlearn all of this like really fucking toxic shit that we've been taught, you know? Like and it's taken me just ages. Like I don't know if it ever ends, you know. I'm only a little bit into it, but it's really wild because it does require a lot of questioning like everything that you believed to be true before. And not to mention, especially since we're here talking about money, like what security and safety like actually means for you. That was one of my biggest awakenings at some point last year. Like I really felt like I was like running out of money. Again, I'm doing air quotes because like what does that mean? But I had less money than I guess I felt like I'd had before. And I definitely didn't have a consistent income. So I didn't have the guarantee of like this will return to me. And so I was forced to like find a way to make it feel okay. Cause like I remember sitting and I was probably like crying on the floor, which is like my classic behavior, and thinking like, okay, so I'm making this situation right now a total disaster, but like this isn't going to be solved like anytime soon. So like am I just committing to like feeling this way every day forever? Because like I don't think that that's going to work. Like it's actually not sustainable. And so I had to really like start to zoom in my own lens on like this exact moment. And I was like, wait, okay, in this exact moment I'm okay. Like I am housed, I am fed, I have internet access, I have whatever support I need to do this. And I'm just actually spiraling about some future that I don't even know is going to happen, which I think so many of us do, like even when you have a job. But I think that, you know, taking away these layers of like what we consider to be like secure, you know, like one of my teachers always says that, we shouldn't describe like day jobs as being like more secure or more safe. She's like, they're just more consistent. And they can still end. Like, let me tell you, as a person who's been fired multiple times, you can go from having a bunch of money to no money in like an hour, you know? So, I feel like that was so rambly and I forgot the original part of the question. But yeah, there's so many layers. And of course, it comes up with my clients as well. I think that I tend to so far work with people that are mostly in 9 to 5s, but there are still layers of this that you get to sort of unpeel at every level of your journey. And I think business just kind of like turns up the dial of the intensity on all of the things that still get to be worked out.
Oh, you just said so many good things there. Okay, so there's a few things I wanted to comment on. So, um, one, the crying on the floor. I this might be entirely subjective just for the world I'm in, but I feel like for a lot of when I hear like the origin stories for a lot of the people in business, I really admire doing like really unconventional businesses their way. And then also for my clients and myself, like I feel like there's often this moment like right before your shit takes off where you have to experience like a profound moment of grief where like
Yes.
like, and I feel like this isn't talked about enough yet, but like if that's where you are right now, if you're crying on the floor and you're like, I'm just realizing I lived by all these rules that really sucked and hurt, and I didn't know there was another way to do this, and it's really painful. I feel like that is such a like valuable initiation into doing things your way. So just wanted to throw that out there because I've had my
Yeah.
crying on the
Oh,
floor
sorry.
too. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just interrupting you because I was just getting coached on this the other day. Because, like, a few weeks ago, I had like a week that just felt like a real emotional crisis for me, where I was having like what I would describe as meltdowns. Granted, it was also like associated with my cycle, which is not to say that like these feelings were not legit. They were just like amplified significantly. But I was like, I haven't been in this situation where I like cannot stop crying. I hadn't been that in that space in a while. And I was like crying about it on a coaching call, like getting coached on it. At the moment, of course, like in that moment, it always feels like this could never work out. Like my life is a disaster. Like, how have I made this decision? Like, why did I put myself in this place? But then, like, a few weeks, like now on the other side, a few weeks later, I feel so much clearer and I'm like getting stuff done. And like my coach was telling me on a call, like, she was like, you kind of like had to go through that to like get to this point. And I know that lots of people will say that like I don't know, you have to like break down to break through, or like the breakthrough is on the other side of the breakdown, but like it's so true. It fucking sucks, but it's so true. And I feel like people really don't talk about it enough. I think there's this idea that like working for yourself is just like I'm on the beach in Bali and like everything is great and I'm getting massages, but it's like 1,000 little deaths of like the version of who you were before.
Yeah, 100%. Like, so I was telling the squad we had our masterclass on pricing on Tuesday, and I was like, I am grateful for the coaches that are like, you are underpricing, like quadruple this immediately. And I told them the honest truth is like my body was in revolt. So when I tried to raise the part price too fast, I couldn't sell it for the life of me. And so I went back and like made everything underpriced and then sold a bunch and then like completely burnt myself into the ground serving that and then was like, okay, yeah, this is worth quadruple what I was pricing it. Um, but I needed that because like I hadn't like processed my belief system. I hadn't brought my body on board. Like I couldn't go from the world undervaluing me so hardcore and like brainwashing myself to believe it to suddenly like of course, this thing that takes me 2 hours is worth four figures for you. Like, I couldn't just go from 0 to 60 without like having a healing process in between, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also unreasonable to expect yourself to go from like one price to quadruple that. And it sounds like you learned that lesson like the hard way. And maybe there was something in between. Like maybe it could have been twice as much and like that would have felt okay. But yeah, I similarly have had coaches work with me on that, like literally just naming prices and me noticing like what I feel in my body and being like, okay, wait, if it's like $500 more, I actually feel okay. But if it's $1,000 more, I like now feel like I want to die, right? And a thing that a piece of advice that I've received that I think is really salient is that like you should just start with the number that feels comfortable in your body. And like you get to question it moving forward. But like to your point, like you're not going to be able to sell the price that you're unsure about because like certainty in your offer and yourself and the transformation is like everything that is required to actually sell people. So you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot, even though you like think you're gonna get more money, you like get less money. But it's a process and I think it's an evolution, right? Like I don't think that we're destined to be at like one price forever if we don't want to be.
Totally. The other the other price, the other thing I wanted to comment about what you said was like rewiring your understanding of safety and security because oh, money goes right to that. And that like I feel like was a huge part of my personal like grief process and evolution. Because like when I've had hard money moments in my business, I like my mind will go back to like my most lucrative jobs. And then I'd be like, but my mental health was terrible. I hated everything I did that day. I was getting migraines all the time. And I'm like, I don't think that was safe. And so like I think part of this whole like being in business for yourself, charging for your work is being like safety is actually separate from my money. And let you comment on that.
Yeah, safety is actually completely separate from your money. You're right. Like it's within you. Like you're the only one who can determine that safety because like I've had so many of those thoughts where I'm like, did I make a mistake? Because like my last full-time job, which I haven't been in for like, I don't know, a year and a half, was like the most money I've ever made. But like to your point, it was so stressful. I like worked all the time. I was also doing my coaching certification, so that was insane to be like in school and working full time. And there were so many things that like I had to pay for because I didn't have time to fucking do shit. Like I had to pay more money for food because I didn't have time to like cook for myself. I had to like pay to go get acupuncture and massages because my hands were like gripped up from just like typing and using a mouse all day. And like my neck was all like, it was just like levels of things. And like, sure, could that have been solved? I guess, but maybe like 8 hours of doing that a day just like isn't sustainable. Not to mention that in that, at least for me in that particular job, I was like fired very abruptly and without cause in my personal belief. So like it just like that is so unsafe and so dangerous, right? So clearly I was like, "Oh, I'm around people that like I cannot trust and like my body is all and nervous system are overextended." And I think the real lesson that I took from, my numerous crying on the floor moments about how like the sky is falling and I'm gonna like run out of money and like be homeless, like whatever the farthest reaches of those fears are, like it showed me that like I actually am always okay because like if I always have my own back, then like I will always be okay. And it's like I know that it's so easy to say, but I think it's really hard to actually believe and sometimes takes us getting to those like real crisis moments for us to be like, wait, but like am I actually dying? And like am I actually in that much danger? I was talking about this with a client yesterday because they're just like in a really tough spot financially, which is like so understandable. But I was like, but the things that you're wishing for are like fantasy things that like won't actually happen. So like we have to work with the reality that's here. And so the question is like, how do you want to see this? Which again is like much easier said than done. But I think the more that we can like just focus on the present moment, really tune into gratitude, even if it is for like the smallest shit, like that's the way that you can get out of it, right? Like I would have to walk myself through like what are my like worst case scenarios? And it's like, okay, worst case scenario, I have to like go move back in with my mom for like a while. And at least I like have that. Like, is that my ideal? Like, no. But like that could happen, right? Or like, oh, I would have to get a job. Or like, oh, maybe I have to sell like I don't know, my clothes or whatever like valuable items I have. I don't know what they are, right? But I think that really just logically tuning into like what's actually true and like what would I actually do if that situation happened can sometimes kind of like snap us out of it. And I think gratitude is like is the best way. Because sometimes I would just be like, okay, all I know for sure is that like I can survive the next 2 weeks. And that's like all I maybe have to know, like in this exact moment. Because beyond that, like me worrying about it today isn't like actually doing anything to solve that.
Yeah, totally. And I'll offer like a little mantra that's been helping me, which is I've redefined safety for myself is I trust myself to handle whatever comes my way with grace.
Hmm.
And then like part of it also for me as an entrepreneur is being like I'm releasing the idea that I'm in control of everything. And I'm like so getting suspicious about sales because I feel like I'll have these periods where I'm just like very like if I just work hard enough, everything will work out. And then like it's always like the big sale comes through and I'm like, ugh, fuck it, I'm going to the beach or something, you know? Um, but I mean, I think there's part of both. Like you do the money making activities and then you rest and then like not getting confused that you only get the money from one or the other. It's like a balance, but that's another tangent
Yeah. And
today.
I think the thing that I've really been realizing lately, which again is like one of those pieces of advice that at least I know I've heard 1,000 times, but I think I didn't really understand until recently, is that like it's really about like the energy with which you're doing the things, and it's really about like what you're thinking about the actions that you're taking, because I think it's so easy to be like, well, I mean, also, I think a lot of beliefs that people come to entrepreneurship or just work in general with are that like it has to be hard, that like in order to earn money, like it has to be hard. And there's a way to like do the same tasks, but like be dreading them and just like make yourself miserable and burn out instead of being like, wait, maybe this is actually fun. And it's like lucky that I get to do this. And maybe sales come through when I'm like unattached to the outcome and I'm just like focusing on helping people instead of like thinking about myself. But like that for me is like has really been a game changer to just realize where it's like, okay, but like who do I actually want to be in this whole process? And a thing that a coach of mine always used to say to me is like, you also don't want to like replicate all the toxic structures that came from the jobs that you didn't like in your own business, because then like why are you doing this if you're just like setting up the same dynamics? And so I was just posting about this on Instagram, but like I can really get into this tendency to be a little bit of a workaholic with like my own stuff, because it's like, well, if I'm not doing it and if I'm not working, then like nobody's going to do it and I'm not going to have any money and I'm going to have to live in a ditch instead of just trusting that it's like, well, what if the things will just get done? And like, what if it'll actually force me to prioritize, you know? And the story I was telling on Instagram was about how I took like an hour and a half break in the middle of the day to go on a walk with my mom because I'm visiting her right now. And I was like, in what world is that like a bad idea? Like, was me sitting in like a dark room typing away, or honestly, maybe even getting distracted by my phone for an hour and a half, like a better life decision? No, because then when I showed up and had to do more work later, I was just like so much more relaxed and chill and carefree, and things just went better. So I think like we get to separate the idea of like not only money from safety, but also just like money from hard work and from struggle and all of these things, because like it's so easy to be like, it gets to be easy, but like it's still hard. Like there still is active work involved, but like it doesn't have to be miserable, I think is the point of what I'm trying to say.
That's such a good point. And like this might be a little woo-woo, but I know for like, so I'm an ex-newspaper reporter, so we used to have crazy deadlines, like 15 stories a week. And I learned back then, like I came into it thinking like to be a good girl, good employee doing what I'm supposed to do. I thought I had to like just sit down until it and like stare at the computer until it was done. And then I'd be up all night finishing everything. And I learned quickly, like if I'm in a place where I can't think of what to say next, I literally have to go take a walk, do something else, and then I will write it so much faster when I come back because I've just cleared space for inspiration to come in. And I'm starting to feel the same way about money is like it's hard to like have space energetically to welcome something new in if all of your energy is like doing I have to do it and control like where is the room for anything else in your sphere, you know?
Yeah, and 100%. I also don't I guess I am just like woo woo, but like the more I get into this, like the more I realize like it is really the balance of both. Like there are strategic actions that you have to take for sure. And there's like math that you get to do. And like not everything is like super sexy and like amazingly fun all the time, but it could be better than like complete torture. But I think that so many of us can struggle, especially, the identities that we've mentioned with like receiving and especially like receiving for like who we are. Like that is like the opposite of what we're told. I mean, I feel like corporate work environments are like you have to be this exact person. You have to fit into this box. You have to fit into this job description for us to like deem you worthy enough. So like it doesn't like the math doesn't math right in our brain to be able to be like, wait, if I actually like took care of myself, like maybe I could like perform better and like maybe it's actually not me being lazy, but like this is exactly what my brain is like designed to do. Like I think that's so true. And I think it speaks to also like the overworking stuff because I know that that's a pattern that I definitely have. And recently I've been working on releasing some things so that I can make more space. And I was reflecting on it the other day because I was like, man, I had a really good day. Like, what was different about it? And it was like, oh yeah, like you took a really chill shower and like I took a really long lunch break and just sat in the sun and like stared at a plant. And like but like it actually pays so much dividends. It feels so simple, but I think as with all of this it's like the answers are kind of like right in front of us and they're like simpler than we think.
Yeah, like the it feels like the action is simple, but coming to the point where you're like, I'm allowed to take a simple action or I'm allowed to have ease is like where it's hard for I think me and most of my clients is just being like, I'm allowed. Just that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm allowed. That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure.
So I've gone on so many tangents because you're dropping so much wisdom, but I'm turning to my outline here. If people are like, I wonder, I feel like I'm getting really triggered around pricing and business stuff that has anything to do with money. I bet there's something going on in my subconscious. How can people begin to become aware of their money wounds if they don't know what they are yet?
Great question. So, I mean, first of all, like obviously working with a coach makes this a lot easier, but if you're willing to do this on your own or even just have a person like a partner or a friend that you can sort of like bounce these questions off of, I think you can really tune in on like what is the moment that's bringing it up for you. So in this example, it's like pricing and you're like, "Oh my God, that price just makes me want to die." Like you can just start to ask yourself like, "What am I making this mean?" Like if I were to charge this amount, like, what do I think that that means about me? Or what does this mean that I would have to do? Or I would be afraid to do this because like X, Y, and Z. And then it's like all of those answers and like the more answers you can come up with, the better will start to point at like what's really going on for you. Because at least from like personal examples for me, I was working through more like being seen than like the pricing in general. But it goes to like really deep childhood wounds of like, oh no, I'm gonna get in trouble, or like I don't matter, or like all of these things that like I wouldn't logically think when it's like, okay, I'm like coming up with like a marketing plan. Like I'm not out here thinking like, oh, it turns out like I feel like I don't matter to my parents and I feel like the rules are more important to me and like all of these things. And I can say this with humor, right? Because like I've laid on the floor and cried about all of these things multiple times. Um, but yeah, it's like you get to examine like what does this mean? Like what does this feeling symbolize to me? And then I think similarly, depending on your level of awareness, which only gets increased through practice, is like noticing what's coming up in your body and thinking about like what does this remind me of? Like have I felt this before? Because usually that'll also point you back to those feelings, whether it's like getting yelled at by a teacher or like having someone say something mean to you on the playground or bullies or whatever. It doesn't all have to be like that literal because there's levels to this. But yeah, I think mostly just that, like examining like what you think it means about you to be charging that and then going down the sort of rabbit hole of the fears of what would happen if you were to do that thing.
Oh, that's such good advice. And I feel like whenever I do that, I always get like served really specific memories that it's tied to. And I think the benefit of like having clarity about like where this stuff is stemming from is then you can be like, do I agree with that really? Is that really like something I want to continue to accept as my belief system? Um,
Yeah. I think, sorry to interrupt you, but I think a thing that I tell clients all the time and I try to remind myself is that our brains are lying to us. Like our brains are really are, essentially running on prediction and are believing that like anything that makes us feel this certain way is going to result in the same bad thing that we experienced before. So that's why our nervous system is just like, nope, shut it down. And it can be really sneaky, right? Like sometimes you'll just be like, why am I like procrastinating on this thing? Or like, why can't I focus? Or like, why am I suddenly getting like really sleepy every time I like need to write this sales email? So it's not always like the most obvious, but like it's just like I think once you realize that like it's a story and it's separate from you, like that can be so powerful. And I know a lot of people who work with parts work, and even if you don't know what parts work is, it's not important, but like you can name this part of yourself that like believes this thing as like a different name that yourself. So you can just be like, oh no, that's like Samantha like coming in again with the same story. And additionally, like I know this to be true for myself, and I think it's true for everybody. I think it's like once you get down to like the real root of all of these fears, you start to realize that you have kind of just like a core set of fears that are affecting like all parts of your life. So a parallel that I like to make for people a lot is like relationships, like romantic relationships and money. It's like they're basically the same. Like you're afraid of all the same shit. It just like shows up completely differently. So once you can start to feel like, oh no, okay, like so that's that's the core thing running the show, you start to see like the other ways in which it like pops up in your life. I think I was referring to it as like a whack-a-mole recently or like a weed. I think a weed is a more appropriate description where you're like it has these really deep roots and it's just like it's popping up over here in like your relationship with your partner, it's popping up over here with work and with money and with family and all of this stuff. So I that again sounds maybe more depressing than inspiring, but I guess what I'm trying to communicate is that like it's usually just a few core things. So like the clearer you get on that, like the faster like everything in your life gets to change.
Oh, that's so good. So real. It just hurt my feelings. I was like, I can see some parallels between money and my love life here. Uh,
That's what I'm here to do is to hurt your feelings with love.
that was real. Okay. So what are some common money thoughts you see like coming up for entrepreneurs that you'd like everybody to, if you have this thought, maybe journal on this, re-examine it, that are like getting in the way of you doing your business?
Oh my gosh. There's so many. Mm, I think there's a lot that comes up around like unworthiness, especially for charging, especially when it comes to service-based work. The idea that like helping somebody should be something that you want to do for free. Um, and I think anytime you're thinking like, oh, but the people I want to work with like can't afford this, or like this is too much, or like I'm charging more than like what that person is doing. Honestly, I think anytime you're thinking about what other people are doing is like a sign that you get to examine it. What are other ones? Hmm, I think this idea that like if you ever find yourself thinking like, I really need the money, and so I'm going to do this thing, it's usually a trap. And it doesn't mean that like you don't get to acknowledge the financial realities of your situation, but I think putting that kind of like pressure on like a client or something to like take care of you with the money again kind of goes back to the codependence. And I know that nothing is ever completely like objective or neutral because like we're people with feelings, but I think the goal should always be to like to care about the like be putting the other person first and not in a like selfless martyr way, but just in a like healthy, healthy boundaried way. I think back to the relationship parallel, like I think people can understand that, like, if you have a romantic partner, like, you're not going to expect them to be like your maid and your mom and like your lover and your like spiritual advisor and like all of these things, because that's just like too much pressure to put on someone. And so I think it's so easy for us to like put that on money. Like, anytime I know this is maybe part of the same thought process, but I used to think like, I need my business to save me. And and I felt like that is like a really unhealthy thought to have. There's probably infinite more, but those are the ones that just come off the top of my head. Yeah. So like anytime you're comparing yourself to other people, anytime you're making assumptions or trying to take too much responsibility for your clients, I think that's a challenge. Um, and then yeah, just expecting your business or the money from it to like save you or solve all of your problems.
Oh, those are good ones. I think one I'm noticing, like for a lot of squad members, is this like, if I want people to buy it, it has to be cheap.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a classic lie. Like it doesn't, the price, which is again a thing that is so hard to understand, I think, until you experience it, but like the price doesn't actually matter. Like it matters because like sure, probably a person who's making like minimum wage maybe won't pay you like $5,000. But it's this idea that like cheaper things are easier to sell is like a total fallacy. Like I think it takes exactly the same amount of work, if not more, because you then also have to sell more of them, which speaks to your story about like burning yourself out because you lowered the price so much. So I think I think the thing is like it goes back to like thinking about other people. It's like your price shouldn't have anything to do with other people. Your price should have to do with the value of what you're providing. And of course, there's like the calculation of like how does that fit into your life? Like how many clients can you even handle time-wise and how much money do you want to make and then what does that get to be? Which is not to say that everything should just be made on like a pure equation basis because it still has to do with like what can your nervous system actually support, like what is actually the real value of this. um but yeah, it should never be about other people because I think it's so easy for us to make these assumptions about like, well, I know what other people can afford and like I know what's best for them. And I think again, it just goes back to like over responsibility for the client and codependency, where it's like, what if your clients are actually sovereign beings who could decide on their own whether the price was right for them and you just charged the price that was right for you? Like that would just be the best situation to be in.
Yeah, totally. And the scenario I like to bring up for people who are struggling with this is like, have you ever offered something for free that no one came to or no one downloaded? Like, because I certainly have. And like the lesson in that is it's not, you're probably having a hard time communicating the value because you don't believe in the value.
Mm-hmm.
If you made it free
Mm-hmm.
because you think it doesn't have enough value for money, then does it have enough value for time or energy? And so like you have to have believe that whatever you're offering for whatever price has value in order to be able to effectively communicate that value to other people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I feel like there's some other common ones I want to touch on for this. So, ooh, okay, here's a sneaky one. If I am struggling to sell, I'm not good at my job.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. There's so many layers to that. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, you might not have yet figured out selling, but does that mean that you're bad at the service that you provide? I think the other thing that so many entrepreneurs get to remember is that, like, you are doing like what, 10 or 15 jobs at once, and like they all require different skill sets, and you get to practice. And the thing I've been reminding myself of, which I guess is a mantra, is that there is no failure, there's only learning. And so, like you were saying, like anytime when it's like, okay, I did a class and then like nobody showed up, it's like, nope, this is just information. Like I get to just take what happened then and decide what I'm going to do next, differently the next time, you know? And it's just like it's the same with everything. Like this all just gets to be like an experimental space that we're dancing in because I think if we get overly attached to making these like really big, horrible, lofty meanings about ourselves, like I'm not supposed to be a business person or like I'm a bad coach or like I'm bad at what I do. It's like, who is that serving? Like it's not serving anybody, right? I think it goes like again, it goes back to I'm like having this realization for myself, but I think it goes back to like just getting so deeply absorbed in like thinking about yourself. Like I know I said the thing about like thinking about what other people are doing, but I think the people that it is important to think about are your clients, not in terms of like what you're projecting onto them, but like what do they actually need? And like if like you can't get over your shit, like how many people don't get the help that they need? Like that's at least what I tell myself is like there are people that are waiting for me to get my fucking shit together because like they need help with their money. Like I'm allowed to cry on the floor. It's not to say I have to get over it right now, but it's like if I don't push through, like more people are worse off than like just me.
Ooh, I love that one. Oh, yeah. I think I might steal that one for me. So,
Steal it.
for people who now are like, all right, I'm gonna go journal on that, and they are aware of these sneaky money thoughts and they want to change them, how can we go about changing our beliefs about money so we stop subconsciously hypnotizing ourselves that we can't have it?
Well, I mean, I think journaling is a great start, like journaling about like getting to the root of what you do believe and then thinking about like whatever the opposite of that is or what you want to believe. Like if you believed that, like how would you show up differently? Like what different results might you be experiencing in your life? Then, as we started talking about, I think hypnosis is a great way to do this without a lot of like effort. um you'd have to not you'd have to. It's easiest, I guess, to work with a person who's trained in it, but like you could also just like make a recording of yourself saying like everything you want to believe and just like listen to it. I think these things don't have to be as complicated as they seem. And then I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I received is just like look for the evidence that like that's not true. Like look for the evidence that things are working. When I was having my crying on the floor moment about running out of money, I had just had to look for evidence for like all the things that were going okay. And in moments when it feels like nothing is going okay, like sometimes that has to be like super small. Like it's like, okay, I know what I'm going to eat or like I'm not outside, you know, or just like I have a cell phone and like internet and like I speak English and like, it's like real it feels like really stupid stuff, but it actually really lands. And I know that I had a transformative moment with gratitude like a few years ago because I was just like, ugh, people are always just telling me to be grateful for stuff and it just feels so stupid. Like I was like, I have an apartment, but like everybody has an apartment. I mean, not everybody, but like I was like, lots of people have apartments. But then when I tuned into like, okay, but like I actually earned this apartment. Like I applied for it, I got approved for it, I've been able to like pay the rent, I decorated it. I think when I thought of it as something that like was a result of like my work and not something that just like happened to me, I think I was able to also just like tap into deeper gratitude. So, yeah, there's lots of stuff. Hypnotize yourself, journal, get grateful, and then look for what's actually working. Because I think that's the thing that so many of us can really undervalue. Like, we're like, ugh, that launch really sucked. Like, only these two people showed up to my like free event. But it's like, okay, but two people did show up. Like, that's great. Like, it might not be what you wanted. And so, like, what do you get to change? But it's like, are those two people nothing because you decided that you needed to have like 10 or 15 or whatever? Like, so yeah, just notice like what's working.
Oh, I love that. And I think it just goes to the heart of all to have a new belief, you basically just need to practice it because the beliefs you have are thoughts you've practiced a lot. So just
They
practice.
are, yeah. So it's a lot of repetition, And there are tons of different ways to do it. Like after I like meditate every morning, I think about five things that I'm grateful for. And then as I go about my day, like I try to also feel really grateful for it. Like even right now, it's like I guess it's still technically winter, but I'm sitting on a really sunny porch. I'm actually getting a little bit hot, but I'm like, wow, I'm so grateful that I'm hot. Like I haven't felt that feeling in a while. Like it's so new, like to remind me that I'm alive. So I think that the more we can tune into that and what that is for you is like really different. So I think also getting clear on your values is great because I know for me it's like anytime I like eat something great or like I see a cool dog or like plants or like I experience sunshine, I'm like this is the best day of my life. Like this is great. But for you it might be like time with your loved one or it might be like your exercise routine or it might be like a really fun TV show that you're watching. So just like really hyper focus on like what actually matters to me and like am I doing enough of those, right? Because I think if your life is like over indexed on just like serious business and like misery and there's no room for like play or fun or joy, then like things are not going to be great, right? So it goes back to what I was talking about before where it's like okay, really taking care of yourself, like self-care in a way that actually means like caring for yourself and nurturing yourself so that you can show up as the most like full and expansive and like happy and abundant version of your business self.
Oh, so beautiful. Okay, well, I think that's a great note to leave it on. Salome, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the podcast audience. Will you let the good people know where to follow you, how to work with you, and of course, all the links for this will be in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's so fun to talk about all of this stuff. I feel like going through starting a business is like the biggest mental and emotional roller coaster that you can like ever do. And as I've been known to say recently, it's like if you want to light all your money shit on fire, start a business. But you can find me primarily on Instagram at Net Positive Money, or my website, which is netpositivecoaching.co. There's always free content there. There'll always be some free workshops. I would love to see y'all.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Check the show notes for how to follow and work with Salome and myself. And if you could use a cheerleader to keep you hyped when your entrepreneurship journey gets hard, I'd love to work with you one-on-one and have you in my squad. Links and info in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode and want more like this, please leave me a 5-star review and share this podcast with all your entrepreneur friends. Okay, love you, bye.